Hi, this is Black Girl Joy, and today we're going to have a super deep and important conversation. But before we do, please like, share, subscribe, and all the places wherever you are, wherever you be. Like, share, subscribe. And remember that you can add your comments into the live stream comments and we'll read and respond to them on air. All right. So today we are talking about suicide prevention because it is Suicide Awareness Month. And I would like to say America has a problem. So America experiences a ton of suicide, but what we are finding more and more and what people are reporting on is the suicide rates in the Black community. They are skyrocketing, and that includes our youth. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. Suicide is the 12th leading cause of death in the United States. 45,979 Americans die by suicide, and 1.2 million attempts were made in 2020. That is based on the information I received from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So to help us break all of this down, we're bringing in Miss MJ Larkin, who is a therapist herself. She's going to give us a quick introduction of her expertise in this area. I am a life coach, so I am bound to say I cannot help with suicide and or not in my profession. I do not treat suicide or clinical depression, but we're going to have MJ on as our resident expert. So MJ, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, everybody. I am MJ Larkin, currently working for Port Counseling based out of Georgia. I specialize in working with adults who are dealing with depression, anxiety, and life transitions such as divorce, co parenting, and a host of other things in between. I do have experience in working with children, adolescents, and teenagers. Some of the biggest things that I've seen when it comes to working with children is learning to use their voice and feeling comfortable enough to express certain things, whether it's being bullied, whether it is, having suicidal ideations. They just want to know that they have a safe space. And so, yeah.
All right. Can you tell us about your program? Then we're going to jump in.
Oh, yes. So I have a parenting challenge happening in the month of October. It's going to be 4 weeks. It's going to be an interactive group. I will be going live once a week for the month of October. We're going to be talking about communication. We're going to talk about navigating social media. We're going to talk about creating healthy relationships and establishing boundaries. And we're also going to talk about how to prevent parental burnout.
All right, awesome. So today we're talking about suicide. And so I just pulled a few stats I found online. Self reported suicide attempts by Black adolescents rose by 73% between 1991, when I was young back then, and 2017. But that's not really that long, guys. It seems like a long time, but it's not. And then what we see is a focus on Black boys increasingly likely to attempt suicide more so than the Black girls who have ideation. So we're going to dig into these stats, and we're going to talk about how do we address mental health in the Black community. So we're going to talk about it from a high level perspective that will include adults, that will include that will include adults and how we interact, and then we're going to funnel down into how that impacts our children. So MJ, are you seeing in your practice an increase in people who need help with suicide prevention, deep clinical depression?
Oh, yes, definitely. Since the pandemic started, I think the pandemic kind of forced us to slow down.
Mhm.
And let me also just say this: suicide has always been going on in the Black community. Unfortunately, research is always just focused on white population. So, what typically happens is they gather a group of white men and white women, they survey them, and then they kind of just let that be the stats for everyone across the board. And so, again, now we're in a space where our voices are being heard and we're kind of emerging in this mental health movement. And so, unfortunately, mental health is still a very taboo topic amongst the Black community. So, a lot of individuals still have that don't ask, don't tell mindset. What happens in this house stays in this house. And so, you don't have a lot of people self reporting. And so, again, another thing that I have just seen personally in working in this field is an increase in the need for community. So people feel like they are just alone and isolated. And so, yeah, people are turning to a host of other things to kind of combat those feelings.
Yeah, I think definitely after the pandemic and we were all so isolated, it really was a test of our mental health, right? And our mental stability. Because when you stuck at the
Mhm.
house by yourself, and no shade, or when you stuck at the house with your kids and you only a provider, and you're not having those interactions where you can vent on a regular basis, it takes a toll.
I mean, and think about this too. How many people were already hiding before the
Mhm,
pandemic? How many people have we seen on the news? And when they interview friends or family, the first thing they say is, I didn't know. But
mhm.
then when they go in the house, they see that the person has given away all their belongings, or they started to isolate. And so they saw different mood swings, but they didn't have anything specific, that said to them, hey, I want to harm myself, or I'm thinking about, harming myself.
So what do you think? It's like, so the first step to me is there's two tracks to this, right? So it's the
Mhm.
person who feels suicidal. And I want to say right now, before we get deep in this conversation, that it can be triggering. So if you are dealing with suicide thoughts, or you know someone who's dealing with this and this is triggering, I invite you to get help and to leave the stream if it's going to impact your mental health. So before we get dive deep, I want to make sure everybody's taking care of themselves. That's the point of this. So don't let us interfere with that. But there's two tracks. So there's the person who is having the suicidal thoughts, and then it's the community and the people who are around that person. So it's almost like, for me, the first step, just like I guess like the use of alcoholism, is probably not a good thing to say, but it is like that recognition that there's a problem. Right. And
Mhm.
so, from the perspective of the person who is having suicidal thoughts, what do you think are key indicators for them that they need to go get help?
Well, anytime I tell my clients, you don't have to wait till things are crumbling to come in and see a therapist. I think what we see a lot of is that people wait until something is actually happening in order to do something. Like, for example, even going to the doctor, right? How many people wait until they break a limb or they have this cough that they can't get rid of, and all of a sudden they're beating down the doors to get on the schedule. But what I tell my clients is it's very important to come from a preventative standpoint. So if you're
Mhm.
noticing increased alcoholism or any other illegal substances, that includes marijuana. That includes marijuana. I'm gonna say that again. It includes any heroin, I mean methamphetamines. Anytime you're engaging in use of illicit drugs, as well, that's an indicator that, okay, I'm not feeling like myself, but what am I, what is this hole that I'm trying to fulfill? And I think too, we've kind of been taught that you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
So instead of going to get help, it's the mindset of I can do this on my own, but you don't have to. You don't have to. Um, that's usually the first indicator, is that if you are not feeling like yourself, even before you get to that point, if you just want to go and sit and talk to someone and talk about some thoughts that you're having, even if they're not suicide related, right? If you're having crying spells, if you're sad, if you notice you have trouble being more social, if you're starting to isolate, you don't have to wait until you're having a breakdown to go see someone.
Okay, so I think that is such a good point. And you talked about how the pull you up. I hate the pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I hate that mentality because it neglects to it creates this attitude around self-care. And when I say self-care, I don't mean just the frou-frou self-care like go get your nails done. I mean like truly taking care of yourself. It
Right.
makes it seem like it is selfish or worthless, like you just got to keep going, you just got to keep going. And
Mhm.
it's just I don't think it's been a productive mindset for us. And I also think it takes us back, and me and you talked about this, to the slavery days.
Yes, because the mindset is I need to be strong. And unfortunately, for a lot of women of color and men of color, we're taught at an early age that, you don't fold, you just keep going. And that if I have to hear it gets greater later one more time, I'm a scream. Because that's not always the case for other people. Sometimes when you're in a mindset, later is not even a thought. You're just worried about, how can you get through right now and get
Mhm.
through the next thing. So unfortunately, again, this mindset is how can I maximize my time and all these
Mhm.
things. But that's counterproductive to taking care of yourself, whether it be spiritually, physically, or mentally.
Yeah. So, and then I also wanted to add about when you start talking about those changes in behavior and you start talking about like drugs and alcohol, but what about food? So for me personally, like when I'm sad, I stop eating. And I know depression is different, like it's a different extreme of sadness, but I stop eating. Or there's some people who eat more. Is that also could that be an indicator?
Well, in order to find out, let me clarify as well. You would need to be screened.
Mm-hmm.
So emotional eating or isolation, those could be symptoms of anxiety or
Mm-hmm.
depression or a mood disorder, another mood disorder. So it's very important that you do seek out a licensed professional that is able to diagnose. So that could be a licensed clinical social worker, LPC, a licensed practicing counselor, or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so that you could actually be screened. There's an entire suicide tool that professionals have within their reach, and that's really how you can kind of gauge.
Okay. So now let's kind of transition right to the other side of the hat. What what do you think that the Black community understands the difference, like truly understands the difference from being sad and being depressed?
I think culturally, no, and I think actually, my opinion is that that's across the board.
Okay.
I hear so many people interchange the two, and I hear some people dress up depression as just sadness.
Mm,
And then I hear the opposite. And again, if you believe that you are depressed, um, I want to kind of take a little soapbox moment here.
that's fine.
Do not go to the doctor first. Please go see a licensed professional. And here is why. Doctors do not treat symptoms. They treat I mean, they don't treat the cause, they just treat symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go in saying the right thing, you're going to walk out with a prescription for an anxiety medication, or a depression, or an antidepressant. And the Black community is the largest misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed community, specifically when it comes to mood disorders. So if you already have an established relationship with your primary care provider, ask them for referrals to a licensed psychologist, counselor, or a psychiatrist. That way you can again get a profile. They can go in and create a profile. You can do a little bit more deep diving into whatever's going on, and then you go from there to diagnose. Now that was my soapbox moment. Let me go back. What I typically see as well, I think culturally across the board make light of certain disorders. Like I hear so many people say, "Oh, the weather's bipolar."
Mm.
Oh, she's bipolar. If she's not been diagnosed with a mood disorder, no. So that again, those type of things in that type, in terms of language, it really just adds to the stigma.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, we had to stop like, oh, she crazy. I was telling my sister today, I was like, oh, we throw out something ain't right with them. Right. But we're not really looking at it for the root of the issue. We just like, something ain't right with them. Let me stay in my own lane. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Let me let them go do them. Something ain't right. But we don't really look deeply like at the issue with the type of empathy or in a way that can help.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned earlier, I think it goes back to slave culture.
Hmm.
But I also think it goes into a host of other things. Just the lack of education about mental health overall is really such a big gap between the Black community and the white community, because we talk about the lack of access to healthcare
Hmm.
and mental health facilities. I mean, doctors, for goodness sakes, right? And just knowing, or not knowing, but having access to those people that can provide more
Hmm.
education. And so, once again, like I mentioned before, mental health overall is such a taboo topic.
But why is that? And if you're watching, drop it in the chat. Like, why do you think mental health in the Black community is so taboo? Because if I have a cold, I can walk up to you and tell you I went to the doctor because I had a cold. But it's funny because I'll say I go to therapy because I have no shame in going. I love going to therapy.
Right.
Probably a little too much, but I do. So, but I can say, I go to therapy. People are like, oh, okay. Why is it so taboo? What is the problem? Like, what is it?
I think it's a mix of things, but I
Mhm.
think overall, again, culturally, we've just been taught to kind of grin and bear it.
Mm,
So who questions anything that looks perfect, right? And again, we culturally believe that the more I take on, or the more I can do for other people, that should make me happy. No, I believe that that's another core belief. And then we talk about the mix of faith and therapy. There's nothing wrong with praying and also having a weekly appointment with your therapist as well. I will say this, I do see a shift in the attitude in our community about
mm,
mental health,
mhm,
especially in the younger generations, that are coming behind us as
mhm,
well. They're really coming from a preventative standpoint of like, no, I don't feel good. Yes, I'm being bullied. I have questions. And I
mhm,
see somebody. And I think it also matters about the environment that you come from. So if the environment, is structured around being quiet and just kind of going through, right?
mhm.
Then that's kind of the mindset. But if you create an environment where people feel safe to come and talk, well, then that can only help the household.
Yeah. So, what do you think are some common responses when people in the Black community try to approach their like inner circle to say, I'm not feeling well, even if they're just hinting at it, right? Because sometimes we
Mhm.
just don't come out right and say, you know what, I'm depressed and I'm da da da.
Right.
We don't. It's just signs, right? Like you
Hmm.
said, the person's isolating, they're sad, they're crying, stuff like that. What do you think are the most common unproductive responses from the black community, from people around us in the black community?
Number one, go pray.
Yeah.
Number two, there's nothing wrong with you.
Mm,
Those are two of the most common responses I hear when clients come in and they talk about their community, and particularly their immediate family. So they're
mhm,
coming in saying, look, I told my mom this. I'm 45 and my mom is 70. Well, we got to think about this too. Mom is from a time where you didn't talk about things, you just got
mhm.
sent off. And so you might not see Auntie Sally anymore
Yeah.
until it's time to go to her funeral, and not knowing she's been in a mental health facility. And I think, just learning how to have empathy and not looking for the right thing to say in response to someone coming and talking to you. I think
Mhm.
that's the biggest thing. I think just overall, we try to say the right thing to fix things, right? But sometimes there's nothing to fix on
Yeah.
your end.
Yeah.
All you can do is be supportive in the best way for that individual.
No, that's really good. That's really good. And a pet peeve for me is like the go pray. And it's not because God isn't helpful, but I am a firm believer that you have a community for a reason. So if someone's approaching you with an emotional issue, your God-given purpose, if you want to go to God, right? Your God-given purpose is to help those around you. It's not just to dismiss them. So both
Mhm.
of the comments you mentioned were just dismissive, which
Yeah.
in turn creates a worse problem.
Yes, and that's when you see isolation. That's when you see the ending of relationships, and you probably never hear from the person again, or either they try to create this perfectionist attitude of everything is great, everything is awesome, but they're really struggling on the inside.
That's okay. So I'm gonna do a little bit of self disclosure, right? So everyone on here typically knows that my mom passed the ALS, which for anybody who watches their parents pass for 3 years would cause you to be in a depressed state. And just some of the things for me that were cues, like even internal cues. I don't know if anybody else caught on to them, but internal
Mhm.
cues were number one was I'm tired. I'm tired. And I found myself always repeating, I'm tired. I'm tired.
Mhm.
I'm tired. Like, and it would be literally on repeat, like breathing every day in my head out loud. I'm tired. How you doing? I'm tired. The
Mhm.
other thing I noticed about my social interactions was in life we're taught scripts, right? Hey, how you doing? Yeah, I'm doing good. Like you say,
Yep.
this it's literal social scripts. But when
Mhm.
I could no longer pretend enough to keep up that script, it was like
Mhm.
there's a problem. Like, how you doing? Like, and I literally got to the point where I hated people asking me how I was doing because I didn't want to lie, but it made it
Mhm.
awkward for everyone when I told them the truth. Right. And so
Mhm.
I would try to find some weird middle ground, like, I'm alive. Right. It was a fact.
Mhm.
It was a fact. And it wasn't like a whole bunch of emotion that I could get through that one sentence and
Right.
exit left. I don't want to have that conversation no more.
Mhm.
But what are those things that you may hear someone with the someone who is like deeply depressed and suicidal, you may hear like, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm tired, I'd never want to wake up. But what are some of those things that you can listen for?
Are you speaking in terms of like being the person of support, or are you talking about the person that's actually going through
Actually
it?
both.
Okay, so we'll start with the first one.
Hmm.
Some specific signs. So let me just say this as a disclaimer: there are no specific signs that I can go down in the list, right?
And it's going to
But I'll
be
give you
exact, right?
examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you examples. If a person starts to give away their belongings, if they start to isolate themselves, if you notice that their mood is constantly changing, in that part, I'm so glad you mentioned about being tired, because mental and emotional exhaustion can wear you out worse than physical exhaustion.
Mhm.
If you're starting to notice a change in their appearance, so if there's someone that's always neatly groomed, like their hair's done, and I'm not talking about like anything lavish or anything, but
Yeah,
just someone that's neatly groomed. If you start to notice a change in their appearance, like they're not taking care of themselves physically, or even the
hygiene.
clothes. Yeah, exactly. That's another sign as well. So those are just a few of the things that you can look for, to say, hey, I noticed that you don't really kind of act like yourself. I want to check in with you. What's going on? Now for the person who is actually dealing with depression, all the things I just mentioned, if you're doing those things and adding on crying spells, also adding on the lack of interest to like live or even go to work, hang out with your kids, deal with your friends, if there's a loss of interest of doing anything that once brought you joy, I would strongly encourage you to go see a licensed professional so that you could get an accurate diagnosis. That doesn't mean that you need medication. I want to also throw that out there as well. Medicine does have its purposes, just like therapy has its purpose. And yes, you can do both if it's needed. But again, please see a licensed professional so that you can be headed in the right direction.
Yeah. And so there are stages, right? So there's the I'm down, then it's the ideation, like if I wasn't here, then it's the visualization of like how do I do it, right? So
Mhm.
there's all of these stages to it. And the point is at any stage, go get help. At any stage, if you're friends at any stage, so like have the conversation. And so let's transition into that. How do you have these tough conversations? Because we don't talk about it as a community. It's already a very tough conversation, right? It's a super tough emotional conversation.
Right.
The person who is like the community or support person it's it's honestly awkward, and it's a lot of pressure because you could feel like if you mess up this conversation, if you're too emotional, if you say the wrong thing during the conversation, that is going to be like the straw that breaks the camel back, and you don't want to have any parts of that, right?
Right.
So what guidance would you give someone on having this conversation? And is there anything culturally that you think needs to be addressed or recognized as we have these conversations?
I think the biggest thing is addressing your own bias,
Hmm.
when it comes to mental health, before you even approach this individual. Because whatever you feel is going to be the thing that you say, and so that's going to be your stance, even if you can visibly see this person upset. Also, I think it's very important to recognize the difference between an ideation and an actual plan. So
Hmm.
someone can say, "I don't want to be here anymore," but they don't have an actual plan to end their life, right? So it's not your job to investigate anything, because you're more than likely not going to ask the right questions. And if you do, people know how to evade answering the questions. And so the goal is to kind of shut down the entire conversation overall, right? But before you even have that conversation, it's very important to check your own biases. If you are going to have that conversation, go in with the want to listen. That's it. You don't have to understand. It doesn't have to be relatable. Again, I think we underestimate the power of presence. And so sometimes someone literally just wants to know that people care about them. But if you are having a conversation and there are concerns, you can suggest to this person, or even just ask them, are you seeing anybody about this? Instead of, well, you need to go get checked out. Well, now you're going to make them shut down and they're not going to talk to anybody, because now we talk about rejection and now that feeds into isolation. So now we got a bigger problem to tackle, right? So again, before you have the conversation, definitely check your own biases, but also go in with the want to listen and not to seek to understand or try to be relatable in any way. And just kind of go from there. It's nothing wrong with asking the person, hey, would you like me to call someone? Would you like for me to, ride with you to this facility? Do you want me to schedule the appointment and go with you? Those are ways to support instead of Here's a number you can call. They're probably more than likely not going to. But again, it's very important to sit down with that person, and you can mention, things that you've observed, and just listen. And then you guys can go from there. Please remember, there's no right thing to say. There are plenty of wrong things to say, but there is no particular right thing to say when you are learning to how to support someone.
Yeah. And so, like you mentioned, offering to go with someone, I think that's great, right? And I think the one of the misperceptions, especially I know from my community, right? That's the community I'm a part of, so that's what I know, is
Mhm.
I've seen, especially when I was younger, if people were suicidal, like, oh, especially if they attempted and weren't successful, oh, they want attention, right? And as I
Yeah.
went through I've struggled with depression on and off all my life. And the one thing I didn't want was attention. I isolated. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. I felt like if I express this, then I'm giving them my problems, and that is
Mhm.
selfish of me. And, that is not fair of me to talk to people about what's going on. And I'm very private. So I'm private, but I tell all my business on here. But my point is that there is a misperception that people who, and that's the sad part, right? People who attempt but aren't successful. Oh, she just took 20 pills. She ain't taking up it. She wasn't trying. You know what I mean? She just
Right.
had to have a stomach. She just want attention. That's all it is. She just want attention. And I think we have that mindset. It's like, no, they don't want attention. They literally don't want to be here. They don't want any attention.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then it's angry. It makes me angry because we don't have empathy and we don't see a person as a person.
Again, I think it goes back to lack of education. And again, just the mindset culturally that the more you can take, it represents like your strength. But people are cracking under pressure. I mean, we see an increased number of suicides every year. And again, like I mentioned early on, the only reason that the Black community has not been noted in a lot of research is because research was not considerate of Black people.
Hmm.
Even now today, when we talk about medical research, they're not always pooling from communities of color, regardless of where you are.
Hmm.
And so we are seeing a shift in that. I am proud to see a shift in that, but we still have a very long way to go,
Hmm.
because not only is it just in the Black community, but just across the board that it's assumed that communities of color are very strong and that we don't need help. And so we've taken
Hmm.
on the same ideas, or this ideology that, oh, well, I can do it, I got it. And you don't have to. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, which is why, like I said before, it's important to kind of, not to kind of, but it's important to check your biases. And again, you don't have to wait until something is wrong. Nothing has to happen in order for you to go see a therapist. And I think that's the biggest misconception. I think just across the board, especially within our community, though, especially because we see that same trend um, happening within, for like medical purposes,
Hmm.
waiting until like literally the last moment. I actually have a client who is a nurse, and one of the things that she's talked to me about is how many African Americans come in the emergency room and don't come out because they've literally waited until they're in stage 4 of something. They waited to the last minute when it got really bad and there was nothing that could be done.
So I like that you bring up that point because to me it brings up a couple of things, right? So number one, Black people have not had the best experience when it comes to doctors, and we still don't, right? So a
Mhm.
therapist is a different type of doctor, but now you mess with my brain. Like, okay, you bandaging up my wrist or my arm,
Right.
that's one thing. But now you mess with my brain, and we instinctively, because of our past experiences and being tested on and all kind of legit history, have an issue with doctors. Number
Mhm.
two, the second part of that is economically,
Right.
even when you have insurance. I went to the doctor and had a certain test done. I walked out the doctor. Actually, no, they made me pay before the procedure, and it was $1,200. I didn't have $1,200. I had to put it. Luckily, I had to put it on like a credit card, but every time we think about going to the doctor, we think about that money. So then it puts us in this loop of being like, okay, well, I'll be okay. Let's see if it just heal on its own. And we've taken that same approach with our mental health, right? Like it's gonna work
Mhm.
itself out. Time heals everything. That's another saying.
And that
Time
is
heals
so not
everything.
true.
You're like, no, time didn't heal that.
Right.
So
That's
what do you think about that? So we have the economic portion because therapy different from a medical doctor where you go get like one bill, or three because they bill you from different places. But therapy is a weekly, biweekly, monthly expense, which adds up. And then the other part is the mistrust in the Black community for doctors and healthcare overall.
I think the biggest thing is the attitude. So typically, unless since you brought up economically, we are what the number one consumers of retail. And I think that's interesting that we are able to consume retail, but when it comes to medical things, right, and mental health and taking care of us, we're not likely to do that. And
Mhm.
I've often questioned like, why is that mindset? Like, why would someone go buy a pair of Jordans before they go pay a therapist or go see a doctor? And again, I think culturally the attitude towards medicine overall has, and rightfully so, and I will validate that, and rightfully so, just the history of, culturally, historically, we've been experimented on. We talk about economic disparities when it comes to access to doctors, access to hospitals, health insurance, and all of those things really play a part. But I think it still goes back into the attitude as a combination as well. And so I think it just really boils down to kind of like the individual. I tell all my clients, this is an investment.
Mhm.
It's an investment. I'm not here to fix your problems. I'm not here to give advice. I went to schools for a specific thing, and that's a helping profession. And that's literally what I do is help. And again, I think it goes back to this misconception of what therapy is, what you do in therapy, and all
Mhm.
of those things. And instead of doing the research for yourself and finding somebody that actually, would be a good fit, it's kind of like, oh, I'll just wait. And by then it's too late. But again, I think, like I said, just to kind of tie everything back in, I just think historically our attitude towards just medicine overall and the healthcare professionals has been tainted. And like I said, rightfully so. But that does not provide an excuse to not take care of yourself.
Yeah. So one of the things I did was I went and got all Black female doctors. It was a choice of mine because it was a preference and knowing how, and I'm not, there are good doctors of all races. I'm not saying that. But for me personally, it was a personal choice to do that
Hmm.
because I feel seen and heard. And that was just my
Yeah.
choice. Right. And so, and I could get one that I don't feel seen and heard, but so far I've had like a really good track record with that. So it helped me trust a little bit more. When you talk about, it was something you just said. I'm trying to go back. You were talking about the cause. You're talking
Oh
about the
yeah,
distrust.
disparities.
So yeah. So how do you think this is what I'm going to ask you. How
Mhm.
do we change the mindset? Because I think personally, being a country girl from rural Georgia, that when we say mental health, it does not even connect with our people, right? Because
Mhm.
we're like, okay, mental health, frou, that's a luxury. I
Yeah.
don't need that. Like, how would you describe mental health and therapy? Because you said people don't know what it is in a way that connects with our community.
I think again it goes back to educating, being educated about what specifically we do in therapy.
Mhm.
Every therapist has their own way of working. I'll use that term instead of terms from my world. But every therapist has their own way of treatment.
Mhm.
Now we are still bound ethically to do no harm. the same way a medical professional is, right?
Mhm.
So again, it's about finding the right fit. Also, asking those tough questions when you have your consultation. And this is the thing, when you are reaching out to a mental health professional, ask them, do they provide free consultations? If not, ask them about a sliding scale. What does that look like? Ask them, what do sessions look like? What will we do in sessions?
What is a
And also,
sliding scale?
oh, I'm sorry. So a sliding scale is a discounted fee.
Mhm.
And there are quite a few I won't say unfortunately, I won't say that word, but for the population that is getting insurance just so they can have a therapist, a lot of practitioners are moving away from accepting insurance. And here is
Yeah.
why: insurance is slow to pay. And they also create this idea that, okay, you have to label them in order for us to pay. So for example, Brazil, if you were coming to see me and you were going to use, let's just say you had Aetna, right?
Mhm.
And you say, oh, I want to use my Aetna insurance. Cool, no problem. So my session fee may be one thing, and insurance will say, okay, we'll pay a portion of that, but she only gets 6 sessions.
Mhm.
Well, what if I diagnose you with depression or
Mhm.
schizophrenia? That's not gonna 6 sessions are not gonna cover it. And so what tends to happen is once people are no longer able to afford, they ghost. And it's unfortunate, when we talk about the financial gap again culturally, but just the disparities when it even comes to insurance. And so there's a big push for insurance to kind of, make up their mind and take a stance about, hey, how are you going to support these individuals that, you do all this marketing for, but yet they're not able to, be seen, or their practitioners aren't able to be compensated because you believe that they can get everything done in 6 sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I could have a whole 15-hour conversation with you of my feelings of our healthcare system and
Oh
how it is
yeah.
not a healthcare system. It's just a like crisis care, get it if you can type of system. I could do a whole. Ooh, okay, I'll just plug Medicare for all because everybody needs to get the help they need without an insurance company telling you this is what
Yes.
it's going to take because they're
And I,
not doctors.
and I will say this as well. If you have children who are receiving Medicaid, did you know that even if you are not receiving Medicaid, but because your children do, you can find a practitioner that takes WellCare, AmeriGroup, Peach State, and you can be seen based on their insurance. A lot of people don't know that.
Never heard of that.
Medicaid and that, the Medicaid, not the Medicaid, that in certain insurance is just not going to advertise certain things.
Mhm.
But I always try to tell my parents that, hey, if you have a child that is receiving services, right, with a community health provider, you can also request to be seen by your own provider with community mental health. Now, the flip side to that is they have a very high turnover rate. So, unfortunately, the person you may start out with may not be the person that you end up with. However, it is still an access to a mental health professional. So, you have access to groups, you have access to family counseling and individual counseling as well. So, a lot of people don't know that, but I always try to push, and preach that to my parents, like, hey, if little Timmy is already, if I'm already seeing little Timmy and you want to request to see another provider, you can do that.
No, that's awesome. Look, now I want to say, just make us a list of everything we need to know. But let's talk about that. Little Timmy, that's his
Hmm.
name. Okay,
Hmm.
little Timmy. Let's talk about little Timmy. So, little Timmy, now you got the kids. We're every generation is passing along something, right? We're getting a
Hmm.
little bit better. We're getting a little bit better. We get a little bit better every generation, but we're passing on those thoughts about mental health care, right? Right
Hmm.
along to our kids. What do you see? Like, what do you tell parents to look out for their kids? Because the Black youth rate, and I think there's a chart somewhere in here, the Black youth rate is, let's see if this is it. I'm gonna see. Let's see if we can share it. All right. So this is just suicide rates by age. You see this blue? The blue is at the bottom, it's 15 to 24. And then what is it doing? It's just slowly climbing. It took a little bit of dip around 2019 and then it's starting to inch back up again. Right. So as we start
Hmm.
looking at these rates for our youth, this is for what is the blue one? I think the blue one is. No, it's not the blue one. It's the green one is black males. So though these are two different, it's the youth is going up and then black males are going up. And in that, the black boys rate is going up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do with little Timmy? How do you tell that he's having an issue? How do you talk to him about his feelings and navigate him to some type of emotional safety or um,
Ooh. All right. Again, it goes back to checking your own biases.
mhm,
Um, Typically, when we talk about our males, particularly black males, there's so much pressure in being a black man alone. So you have increased police brutality. You have increased fatality, just being an innocent bystander. So there are a lot of environmental factors that are going on as well. We have seen a significant increase in bullying among like the 10 and 13 age range. And so
mhm,
that's really the population that is surging now in committing suicide. And it's one of the reasons is primarily because of being bullied at school. But then it also plays a part into lack of support within the environment. So if little Timmy is homosexual, or if he's not sure of his sexuality, or if he's battling anything else, his grades are starting to slip, or he doesn't have a relationship with any of his family members. Like, there's a host of factors that play into this. But before you can even talk to your child about anything, you first have to address your own biases. So it might be that you notice things in him, but you don't know how to approach him outside of your beliefs. And that's where parent support groups come into play. That's when talking to school, admin staff at school counselors, the principal, assistant principal. Even if you have some close friends around you who are in the mental health profession, reaching out to those individuals as well. So I think there's so much that happens that it can be overwhelming. But the biggest thing that I tell parents that I work with is that you have to check you first before
mhm.
you can do anything.
Yeah, and I think also when you check you also have to realize that I think for me as a parent, especially as a single mom, I take a lot of stuff from my child, like personally, right?
Yeah.
And you're really gonna have to step outside of like what you need in this moment. You're gonna have to find your support somewhere else
Mhm.
and not make it about you. And it's
Mhm.
not to be mean or anything like that. It's just saying, okay, you may have to go talk to your own therapist to help you get
Right.
through this. And little Timmy, which no shade to Timmy, is like, but you, little Timmy, may need to go talk to a separate therapist, or
Right.
maybe y'all bring it together sometimes. But taking yourself out of the spotlight, what does this mean about me as a parent? Because
Yeah.
I go there all the time. What does this mean about me? And at the
Yeah.
moment, it can't be about me, right? It
Mhm.
can't be about the parent.
Yeah, and I think too, even to just kind of piggyback off of that, recognizing that there are some instances where it's bigger than you.
Hmm.
And so it's not, believe it or not, a lot of parents want to help their kids.
Hmm.
I think what society would have us to believe is that single parents don't have enough time, busy parents don't care, men don't care, women don't care. Oh, like what is the term? Latchkey kids, all these
Hmm.
things. There are a lot of parents who really want to help their children. They just don't know where to start, and they don't
Hmm.
know what to do. And so again, when I think we talked about this before, parent shaming. So feeling too embarrassed to even talk to a friend that might have a viable resource, right? Someone that
Hmm.
they're connected to that could help you and could provide certain information as well. So I think again, it goes back to not just checking your own biases, but also recognizing that yes, this is hard, but it's not your personal shame,
Hmm.
and it's not a personal shame against the child, and it's not a personal shame against you. This is the matter at hand, and the goal is to make sure that the child is safe, or that the individual is safe.
All right, so we're at like 50 minutes. I know I was only supposed to keep you for 30, is all we always do. But I want to share some of these resources that you sent over to me. And so one of them was the QPR Institute. I'm going to put a link to it in our chat for the people who are watching. And so you sent this to me, and it literally was a training for just the normal average person
Mhm.
who may know someone or interact with someone who may have some suicidal thoughts or dealing with depression. I'm just going to share on screen. I went through it today. I was like, I'm going to do it before we get on here. It's $30, guys. It's not super expensive, but it provided me with such good information and it was very thorough. And honestly, like I wish I may have my son take this because you never know with him or his friends because you just
Mhm.
I'm like he doesn't tell me everything his friends say, right? Um, but it just had such good information. So it listed out like verbal cues. I wish I was there. Like that's very direct, right? One of them they said, which it may not be on here. Oh, I'm just tired of life. Like one of them was like, I wish I'll go to sleep and never wake up. So it's not really the exact words, but the message that's coming
Yes.
out of the words. And it walked me through like I want out. I don't want to be around, right? I don't want to be around much longer. And I found it just so helpful as I went through this course. So I just want to say thank you for sending it to me. And also, I strongly recommend going through this. I even got my certification. See that, y'all? I showed it.
Yeah, the QPR Institute. I mean, I'm so glad they created this because this is a again viable resource that
Mhm,
anyone can take. I think again, like I mentioned before, the limited access is also added into not being educated about certain things. But I think that this is super helpful because it's not a pressure. There's no pressure to say or do the right things. What I also like about this training is that it walks you through about, hey, it's not your job to be an investigator, right? So
mhm,
you're not coming from an investigative standpoint. And like I said before, a lot of people want to help, but they don't know what to do or where to go.
mhm,
And so I think the QPR Institute, this was a really helpful resource. It was mandated that we had to take it. When I was working with community mental health,
okay,
I have a friend who actually has an organization and they periodically will do these trainings. It is free. You just have to sign up for it and then you have access to it.
mhm,
So one thing I will say to those who are watching, if you're watching currently or watching the replay, find your nonprofit organizations in your community
mhm,
and see what they're offering. A lot of organizations do offer specific training, be it towards trauma, if it's towards
mhm.
suicide or any other mental health disorders.
All right. And then the other one you sent me was American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which is where I got a lot of my stats from today. What can
Mhm.
you tell us about that organization?
Oh yes. So if you go on the actual site, they list you can do it by state, I believe, and you can
Mhm,
find organizations that offer suicide prevention programs such as like advocating for suicide prevention and a list of local nonprofit organizations that you can also collect more information from. It also houses statistics. That's a word that I butcher. It also houses stats on suicide. What I am hoping that we start to incorporate more is that we hear more about demographic wise, economically, where a lot of suicide occurrences are happening.
mm,
We don't see that now. We just know the basics. Oh, middle-aged white males have a higher rate at completing a suicide attempt. They have lethal
mhm,
means. Men are more likely to carry out suicide because they do use lethal means such as knives. Or guns or weapons of some sort, while there's research that says, oh, women will drown themselves or they'll take pills and such things like that. But it's not limited because it happens across the board. But
mhm.
I would like to see more research about economically where these individuals are from.
Yeah.
We know a little bit about like high profile professions, and I
Mhm,
won't get into that because I know we're ending, but there's some of that demographic. But when it comes to the Black community, it's limited research. So I'll be interested to see in the next 5 years what that looks like culturally for us here in
Yeah.
college.
No, that would be super interesting to see. And as you said, I was like, yeah, I didn't see anything about
Mhm.
where they're
Yeah.
really falling. Yeah, that's definitely a limitation. So before we end, I guess I'm going to leave with my last little thought, and then I'll let you end with what you think based on our conversation around suicide and mental health in the Black community. Like, what I'll let you have the last word.
Okay.
So, for me, I want to say that I think, as someone who has dealt with depression, I would say to listen and pay attention to the people around you. Because when people get on the news and they say, well, I didn't see it coming, we are, as a society, so inundated all the time with social media, with current events, injustices, shootings everywhere. We're constantly
Mhm.
inundated that we don't, this is just my opinion, that sometimes we can overlook people and the human side of people, right? And I
Mhm.
am 100% guilty of being like, I keep up with my friends on Facebook, right? I'm not connecting, having those deep conversations. So I just want to say, be aware of the people around you and listen out for cues, listen out for anything that raises a trigger, and don't be afraid to address it, right? And then for the people who may be suffering with depression, um, my last word would be, please go get help. You would just be surprised. As somebody, I will testify to therapy all day. Therapy literally, and when I say literally, I mean literally, saved my life. And so I would want everyone else to have the experience I have. And if you have a therapist that you don't connect with, go to the next therapist. It's just like dating. There's a ton of fish in the pool, right? So you just got to find the one that relates to you in a way that they can communicate with you in the way you need to be communicated with. They can host your sessions in the way that you need to be communicated, or, the way your sessions need to go. But ask for help and try your best not to isolate, and always keep 1 to 2 or however many good friends around you, good people, could be family members, who you can open up to and be honest with. Because I think that is what keeps you going. So that's just from my personal experience. And MJ, I definitely want you to have the expertise at the end.
um, I just want to speak to everyone across the board, whether you are in a position to support or whether you are the person needing support. There's no shame in asking for help, and there's no shame in wanting to receive help. I will encourage all of us to lean into our communities. It is time out for self isolation. Again, don't be afraid to speak up. If you see something, say something. And as always, make sure that you are being kind to yourself and not beating yourself up for having certain thoughts. This is literally what we do in therapy. We break things down, talk about the roots of things, and then we go from there. But the last piece I will leave everyone with is our responsibility to educate ourselves. And so we have too many things at our fingertips to not say anything. So if you see something, say something. But again, remember, there's no shame in asking for help or wanting to give help.
All right. So you guys just remember, MJ is a therapist. Where do you practice? What states?
Georgia and Florida. Hopefully South Carolina really soon.
All right. So if you're in Georgia, Florida, and soon South Carolina, you said,
Yes.
reach out to MJ. I will say I am a life coach. Again, I cannot treat depression. It's one of those things I have to say, right? Because I want you to get the right care for what you need. But if you are looking for a life or career coach, reach out to me. I put my LinkedIn in the chat. So until next time, thank you. And we wish you the best, and the best health mentally and physically that you can have. We'll see you next week. Bye.